Okay, so in this video, I want to talk about productivity. Right. My dog's excited. We're going to talk about productivity. So, how do we decide what's important? How do we manage what's urgent? How do we spend our limited amount of time focused on tasks which are aligned with our long-term goals and short-term needs so that we can make the most out of our lives, right? This is a skill that a lot of people struggle with in life. And Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, came up with this idea, which is captured in this Eisenhower matrix, to organize tasks into two types of things, right? Two scales. One, the scale of importance, which are the things that matter to you or are lined up with your short or long term goals. And then urgent things, which are the things that need to be done soon, either because you or others demand that to be done right away. Now, of course, there are things which are both, right? You've got to do it right away, and they matter to you, right? They have deadlines and they're lined up with what matters to you. Then there's things which aren't not important, uh, but people still want them to be done right away. They demand that you get this done, but it's something that you don't care about, right? Then there's things that are important but don't have deadlines, and you don't want to forget about them just because they don't have a specific date by which they want to get done. So they're not urgent, but they still matter. And then there's things which are neither, which perhaps you shouldn't do, but we sometimes spend time doing. And noticing that we're spending a lot of time there can free us time to actually spend time doing other things. So using this to make decisions about how we spend or limited time capital, right? Because time, unfortunately, is not an infinite resource. We have only X amount of hours each day and only one lifetime to live. So deciding what makes things important, and it's kind of deciding what makes them necessary for the future, right? Sometimes tasks uh, might seem important, but if you really think about it, it's like where I'm trying to head on in my life, that's a distraction. I don't really want to do that right now. But at the same time, you might also want to have some distractions in your life. It might not seem important to do certain things for the short term, like say exercise or spending some time cooking to have a proper diet. But then if you think about it, long term, my health is going to keep me alive. That is important. I got to make sure I reserve time for that, right? Or schoolwork might seem something that's not important for you at least, or how hard you work on your job. But then you think about it, it's like, nah, I want to make sure that I have things like the luxury and the comfort that I have in my life. And if my career doesn't advance, I'm not going to be able to get those things. So I guess it is important to have to progress in my career. So I guess I have to do this work that others are requiring of me, right? Pursuing passions can be something that you forget that's important because maybe uh, it's that passion that's going to start something new for your life that's going to be enriching. Spending time with the ones we love, it could be something that's important. So it's not easy to identify the things which are most important to you in order to prioritize how you spend your time. And we're going to spend another video talking about that, how to decide when things are important or not. But I wanted to spend time in this video just kind of thinking about each of these quadrants in more detail and how to deal with things that fall into these quadrants. We'll talk about how to put things in each quadrant in a future situation. Now, the first and most important quadrant is the quadrant of things which are important and urgent. These are the things that need to be done right away. These are the things that uh, have clear deadlines and significant consequences for your long-term goals if you don't complete them, right? So you've got to do them. You've got to do them right away. Uh, and you probably should do them in order of importance. And you probably should make sure you're not wasting time while you're doing them. So using some focus strategies, and I have a different video that talks about focus strategies. It can be very important to make sure you maximize your productivity during this time. But you want to make sure that you spend most of your time in this quadrant, doing the things that matter and need to be done right away, right? And having a workflow organizer, a to-do list, a calendar, a task list system where you keep track of these things is very, very important to make sure that you prioritize and organize so that you don't forget something that you need to get done. Now, it is also important to make sure that you don't put too much in this quadrant because we tend to think that everything is important, and that's not possible. Time is limited. So if you're going to have, let's say, 70% of your work time dedicated to things like this, maybe even 80%. Yeah, my dog is like 70%. You got to make more than that. You got to spend your time here, right? So yeah, if you want to spend 70 to 80% of your time doing work that's important and urgent, then you want to make sure that you don't do too much that's important, right? You can't do too much. Yeah. So learning how to minimize that. So like having that top one or top two things to get done today, right? And then maybe have a second tier of things that it's like, it'd be nice if I got to this, but it won't be the end of the world if I don't, right? So I always try each day to prioritize. Okay, these are the two things I must get done today. Then I go like, okay, these are the other things which I also think it's important. We're going to make sure we try to tackle those two and so forth, right? So we'll talk more about that in another video, how to prioritize your lists, but make sure that you don't try to do too much. You only have a limited time capital and you don't want to overburden yourself by saying that 10,000 things are important. So the way to get rid of that mentality is to prioritize the things which are important. And you do the most important. Those top two, you hit them first, get those done, and then you work on the other things if you can, right? Now, the second category is the idea of things which are important but not urgent. Now, urgency often comes from other people putting the deadlines on us. And then it could be yourself too. Maybe you're saying it's urgent for me to get this done because I really want to have a driver license. So I got to get this appointment scheduled today. So you make a deadline for yourself to do that because you really want to start driving right away. So you make the deadline for yourself, but a lot of times the urgency comes from outside, from exterior sources, from a boss, from an employer, from a business partner or a client that is putting a demand on you that certain thing is done at a certain time. Or if you're a student, like a teacher, right, that is giving you that deadline. But there are things that don't have urgency, that they are less urgent, things that are due really far away from now, or that don't necessarily have a deadline. This involves future planning. You want to make sure you still hit these things and that you do them before they become urgent, or that you do them so they don't get neglected. The best way to deal with that is to set a schedule. They might not have a deadline, but you can still schedule them. So using a calendar system where you literally put blocks of time to deal with each of these tasks is the way to go. So reserve a time each day to work on some of these tasks or once a week and literally block out the time. So an example of this could be maybe working out, right? I'm not urgent. I don't need to do it right away. There's no one putting pressure on me to do that, but it's important to me because I want to be healthy long term. So I schedule time 3 times a week to do that. Or maybe it's not urgent that I spend going a date with my wife, but it's important to me that I do so. So I put a date night on Saturday night and I make sure that I make the time to do that, right? Maybe it's not urgent that I spend time training my dog, but I want to bond with my dog. So it's important that I do that. So I schedule a time on Sunday to make sure that I do that, right? So becoming a schedule master is the secret to make sure you don't forget or neglect these things. And then it also helps you avoid forgetting about things that don't have deadlines or things that have really far away deadlines and then suddenly they become urgent because you never dealt with them, right? So that's an important way to deal with that. Now, those were the most important quadrants that you have to do. I will, however, before moving on to the last one, do want to mention that uh, life can be easily out of balance, okay, if you never have time to do things which are important to you, okay? Uh, Even the things which are not urgent, right? So to do so with purpose, to spend the time dedicated to things that matter the most to you, right? Uh, is needs to be a priority for you, right? That's the biggest priority, prioritizing. Because if you don't do that, you end up not living the life you want to live. You end up not pursuing your goals. You end up not closer to the things that you actually want to achieve. But it is important to dedicate a limited amount of time to these scheduled tasks, especially from the second quadrant, because you don't want them to overtake your life because you have those urgent things to deal with, right? And so having a schedule or using a timer to keep track of how long you're spending on the task is very important. So if you say, I'm going to spend an hour on Friday training my dog. You put the timer and you start the time and you do it for an hour and then you stop. So that way you don't overextend yourself and end up doing a lot of things and then sacrificing where you really should be spending most of the time, which is quadrant one. All right. Then the last part here is the red tasks. Now, these are the quadrants that you are trying not to spend any time on if you can help it, right? The first one I want to talk about is quadrant three, which is the not important, urgent things. Now, think about this. If this is not important, that's probably coming from somebody else. Because why would you set a deadline for yourself if make it urgent if it's not important to you? Like, why? Why would you do that to yourself, right? So if it's something that doesn't matter to you, why would you even set a deadline for it? So it's usually coming from outside. But so there's usually something that needs to be done right away because someone demands that it's done right away. But it's not something that matters to you personally. So the ideal scenario is to delegate these tasks if you are lucky enough to have somebody else that can do them for you. Now, if you're a student or someone who's in charge of that task and someone's expecting you to do it, obviously you can have somebody else do it, not without permission. Otherwise, you might get yourself in trouble. But if it's something that you don't need to be you, it doesn't require your specific skills. Maybe you can send it to somebody else, right? Or say, for example, there's someone that's always asking you for help, and you like to help people, and that's important to you. Maybe not urgent, so you schedule the time to help a person for an hour a week, right? So that you limit the amount of time that's taking from your schedule. But maybe that person is demanding more and more attention, and an hour is not enough. Now, it's getting to the point. It's like, okay, helping them this much isn't important to me. I want to help a little, and that's why I put it on quadrant two and I schedule that. But it's not so important that it needs to be consuming my time. It's getting too much. So what you can do is you can also deflect. So sometimes you can't delegate, but you can deflect. And you can try to get away with not doing it, just basically ignoring that for as long as you can. Or basically saying, I'm sorry, I don't have time for this right now. I'll let you know when I do, and maybe never letting them know when you do. And if they keep bugging you about it, maybe you can say, okay, look, I can't help you with this, but here's someone else who can. Or here's a resource that I can give you that maybe could help you make this help yourself. Now, helping society be better is important, but helping people help themselves is also important, so that you don't actually overburden yourself and don't live your life, right? Do not completely uh, give up on things which are important to you at the expense of other people's, right? So there's nothing wrong with prioritizing yourself, right? And the things that you want to do. Now, it is okay to learn to say no. Another good way to deal with this is to, if you absolutely must, and you're the kind of person who has real trouble saying no, schedule this. Turn it into a quadrant two thing, where you basically say, I spend 2 hours every Sunday doing things which are not important but urgent. And then you do as much as you can during those 2 hours, and then you stop. And you limit yourself to those 2 hours, and that's it. And you don't go above that, and that's it. Now, remember, if you're doing this because you consider satisfying the urgent needs of others an important thing, and therefore you're putting it on quadrant two. But if you're doing that, you're probably taking away time from something else that could have been important, that could have been scheduled for quadrant two. So try as hard as you can to just deflect or delegate so that you don't spend time doing this too much. The last category is the stuff that's not important and not urgent. Now, why on earth would you do any of these things, right? I wouldn't even add them to my to-do list. I wouldn't put them on my schedule, right? They don't matter. They don't matter to you. They don't matter to somebody else. Nobody's putting a deadline on you, and yet you're doing it. Life is too short to spend time doing things that others demand of you that you don't care about. That's why quadrant 2 and 3. But even less time you should be spending on things which are not important to you and that no one cares if you do, right? Now, why would you do this? These are distractions. These are wastes of time, right? Now, note that things like hobbies, by the way, or that you do for fun, are actually important. They could be important. Okay, it's important to have time to actually do you, right? To spend with your passions, to spend the things that make you relaxed. Uh, Otherwise, you can explode just being this productivity machine. But then you move them in the right category if they're actually important, but not, you schedule them, right? Because they're probably not urgent if you're something like this. So, for example, let's say playing video games for you, or going to a yoga session, or going to soak in a hot tub. it's something that you want to make sure that you do because it helps you relax. So then you schedule that because it actually is important because relaxation is important, right? And now it's probably not an urgent thing unless you're about to blow up out of stress. You might want to do that right away. But if it is something that you can wait, you can schedule it. Uh, but what you shouldn't be doing is mindlessly spending time on things that don't enrich your life, don't align with your goals, don't help you be healthy, and yet you're doing them. Like maybe scrolling through social media 5 hours a day and replying to comments on social media or reading websites that really just distract you from your long-term goals. If that's not really helping you get closer to your goals, not helping you relax so you have more energy to spend on your goals, why on earth are you spending any time on that? Right? That is something that you should just delete, declutter, remove from your life. So just to give an example of how this would apply for a student, because I work for students and that's why this video is mostly designed for, is think about something that is a project that is due tomorrow and it's worth a big part of your grade. Where would you put that? Well, that sounds like something urgent, right? Because it's due tomorrow. But it's also very important because it's a huge part of your grade. And it's important to you to do well in school because you want to advance your career. So you put that on the quadrant one and you do it right away, right? And then you probably use focus strategies so that you make sure that you're not wasting time while you're doing that and you spend most of your time on that throughout the day. What about something like perhaps a project that is not due soon, or maybe doesn't have a due date, or maybe the teacher is willing to accept a late, right? Well, then that kind of sounds like something not urgent. It might still be important. It might be a big part of your grade, but you can do it later. So you put it on the second quadrant and you schedule it. You say on 6 p.m. on Friday night, I will spend 1 hour working on this chemistry project that's not due yet, right? So that's an example of what you would do with that. Quadrant three would be something that you don't need to do at all. It's not necessarily for your skill to do it. Maybe you're in a group project and it's not your job to do a certain thing and you delegate that to somebody else. Or maybe it's something that you try to deflect because it doesn't really matter. Like a teacher asks you to do like a reflection that doesn't affect your grade, or a homework assignment that barely affects your grade or doesn't affect your grade, right? Now maybe you consider doing homework important because it helps you be prepared for the test, but maybe it's not as important as other things which are on your importance list, and so you deprioritize and end up falling on quadrant three. So maybe you don't do the homework assignment, and maybe you try to deflect it. Maybe you email the teacher and say, "Look, I'm going to study really hard, but I'm not going to do this homework assignment. And if I pass the test with an A, are you willing to drop this homework assignment because I already proved to you that I know it, so I don't need to do the practice? Are you fine with that?" Well, it's a bargain, but if the teacher takes it, there you go, you just deflected it, right? Because it's not something that's significant for your grade, so why spend a lot of time working on it? Although it could be important, again, if you need that in order to do well on the actual test, which actually is very important, right? What about target four? Maybe an assignment that is worth a bonus grade that you don't have to do. Your grade is already good, or it's not going to help your grade that much, right? Then don't do it. Just ignore it, delete it, pretend it's not supposed to be there, right? Why would you waste any time with that, right? So that's an example of how you would put things into different quadrants as a student. Now, the whole idea here is to be very intentional about how you spend your time so that you can become more efficient and spend more time doing the things that you actually want to do and that are important to you. Now, I know I'm saying that you should spend most of your time with things which are urgent and important, and then schedule the rest of the time with things which are important, and then avoid doing all the rest. Definitely avoid doing things which aren't either, right? But I also want to say that I actually schedule on my life unstructured time. And I know this is kind of ironic because I'm saying to intentionally schedule time to be unintentional. So what I mean about that is that once in a while, I have whole days when I'm on vacation or on a weekend day or whole sections of my day, maybe an hour here or 2 hours there, whenever I can spare, where literally in my schedule I put nothing. And then in that time, I literally do whatever I want. I don't think about what I have to do, about what's important and what is urgent. I just do whatever the hell I feel like doing. I have this unstructured time so that I don't feel like I'm this machine, right, of efficiency. So I don't feel like I live for the sake of my schedule. So I feel like I can just be me and allow myself to fall apart a little. Too much structure can make you not find out new passions, and not feel like you actually have freedom, right? So it's important to actually allow yourself to be free sometimes, right? And that's kind of what I'm going to say about that. But make sure this is kind of like a quadrant two thing, where you kind of set up certain amounts of time in order for that, so that you don't overdo that and you don't forget things which are actually important or urgent, right? In order, if of course it is important to you to reach your goals. If it is a priority to you to reach your goals, you should not just neglect your goals. And to do that, you've got to make sure you spend most of your time with the things which are important. So time is a limited resource. All of this is about learning to be intentional on how you spend your time. Uh, now, when it comes to schoolwork, some work is definitely more important than others. Some work is not important at all because it doesn't have a good impact on the grade. Try to spend more energy on things that have more educational value for your life, for your career, and things that affect your grade more, because you will feel more fulfilled and engaged when you do that, and you will find yourself getting closer to your goals. But this is something that you can apply in all areas of your life, not just academically. It's a really helpful way to think about prioritizing, but you can't do this well without knowing how to decide what's important. And on the next video, we're going to talk about that. And so I hope you found this helpful. I'll see you guys.